And I'm very happy now to welcome Syria Sirhan, Facilitator and Administrator of the OTF Connects program, who will be getting us started now. Syria, are you all ready?
I am. Thank you so much, Mary. And hello, everyone. Excuse me, and welcome to OTF Connects. Many of you are returned to our program, so you know and you're familiar with the rich program that we're offering this year through OTF Connects. I'm happy to let you know at this time that quite a large number of math webinars have recently been posted. So do check the calendar frequently and check the calendar. There's a lot that have been posted for the rest of February, March, April, and May that will support teachers in math. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for joining us tonight. As Melly said earlier, it's wonderful to have representation from across the province, and it's so good to have people from the north joining us. So keep spreading the word, and we look forward to seeing more teachers from the north joining us. I'd like to take a few minutes at this time to announce how important it is for you to fill in the feedback survey, which you will receive automatically once you log out of the session. Your feedback is so very important to us as we grow and improve our program. And what's new this year, for those of you new to OTF Connects tonight, is the fact that you'll receive a certificate of participation for each of the live sessions that you attend. You get the opportunity to do that once you fill in the survey and submit the survey. So please take a few minutes when you're done at the end of the session to give us your feedback. It's now my pleasure to welcome Marci Duncan and Michelle Tregoning, who will be facilitating tonight's webinar, Engagement and Assessment. Marci and Michelle are amazing teachers who work collaboratively, though they are in vastly different time zones. Michelle is joining us from Australia, where I understand temperature is 30 degrees, and I just finished shoveling quite a bit of snow. So I'm a little envious, Michelle. So welcome, Marci and Michelle. I'm going to pass the mic over to you so you can share with us how you work together. So thank you all, and over to you, Marci and Michelle.
Thanks, Syria. Can everybody hear me okay?
Beautifully at my end.
Check marks there, yeah. Awesome. Okay, so it's -30 in Timmins. Wow, that sounds pretty cold. So thanks for having us tonight, Syria. We're gonna I guess, are we going to start with the slides, Mally, or do you want us to introduce ourselves first?
Maybe we'll go to your first slide, and then you can introduce yourself.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I am just going to actually move us to the second slide, and this is Michelle and I one day when we were in Australia, and Michelle's just going to say hello, and before she does that, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. So I work for the Simcoe County District School Board, where I work as part of a program and innovation team, where we are resource teachers and we support professional learning throughout our board and in 101 schools in Simcoe County. My area is technology, K-12, and so I really enjoy enhancing learning through the use of digital technologies. And this is Michelle.
And I work for the New South Wales Department of Education in Sydney, and at the moment I work across 2 sites, part-time as a deputy principal at a school where I'm supporting the teachers here in transforming their practice, especially around the areas of mathematics. And I'm also lucky enough to work within the state office of the New South Wales Department, and I sometimes work with the University of Western Sydney as a casual academic, they call me.
That's awesome. Okay, we're just going to move right into our first activity. So what we'd like you to do is think of the most vivid memory of learning in school. And this can be when you're in the role of a teacher or when you were a student, and think about that for a second and what the characteristics of that activity were. Then what we'd like you to do is, and I believe Mally's going to post this in the chat, the web address you're seeing there, and that's for an answer garden. And what you can do is once you have that vivid memory in mind, just take a minute, think about the characteristics of the activity, and post your answers to the answer garden. And you'll see how those words grow and change as everyone adds to the answer garden. So you can add more than one word if you'd like to. And as you hit, you type the words in and then hit enter, you should see the screen changing and the words coming up on the screen. All right, we'll just give you another 30 seconds or so to put those words in. Really think about what was the part about the activity that made it so vivid in your memory. Okay, so just looking at the words here, you guys can see that there's the word fun there is just a little bit bigger than some of the other words. And so what that means is that more than one person has entered the word fun. And you can also see that the biggest word on the page is engaging. So that means that the word that was entered the most into the to the answer garden was the word engaging. So that's sort of where we'd like to start tonight, with that idea that when learning is engaging, it's something that sticks in our brains and we remember it.
I think as well, Marci, the opposite to that is a couple of people talked about dull, and often that it's those really extreme experiences within school that we remember, those that were extremely engaging, but also those moments that you had that were extremely disengaging.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm just going to take us to the next page. And if you're signed into Google when we look at this double entry journal, there's going to be, Mally's going to put up the link for the double entry journal. And if you click on that link, what it's going to do is ask you to make a copy of that in your own Google Drive. And then you can fill it in. And we're just going to get Michelle here to talk a little bit about why we use a double entry journal.
So a double entry journal is a really great technique for getting the students to reflect on their learning and also see their own development and their own growth. So Marci and I both have a really firm belief that within professional learning, it's really useful when you can be exposed to potentially new strategies that you can use in any part of your classroom. So what we would like you to do at the moment is just start about thinking about your initial responses to those particular questions. So what is it? Why does it matter? How often should it happen? And what are some of the strategies that you already use?
Okay, So we're just going to give you a little bit of time to think about those questions, another minute, and then we're going to move to our next slide. Okay, so I'm going to bring everyone back now just to these slides and the double entry journal on the screen there. And just wanted to mention too that if you're a Google Apps for Education board where you're a teacher or an educator, if the way that we made that link to force somebody to make a copy of a Google Doc, if you ever want to use this strategy, basically I just took the URL and at the very end of the URL it says edit, E-D-I-T. And I backspaced those 4 letters out and I put the word copy. And that's the URL I share. And when you do that, it requires the person that clicks on the link to make their own copy of the document. So it's almost like a virtual photocopier in that way. Okay, I'm just going to move us to the next slide.
So what we're going to be doing now is, hopefully through the rest of the session, is going back towards that double entry journal when we've had moments of learning or things that have challenged our thinking or ideas that have actually really cemented what we feel sometimes in our gut as professional educators. And one of the things we're going to start with is looking at a video from Dylan William. So Dylan William is one of the experts in the field of formative, embedded formative assessment. And this is a little clip from a session that he ran for some teachers on a webinar.
Awesome. If you could put that link in the chat now, Mallory, that would be great.
Okay, so I'm going to put that link to the video in the chat, and I'm also going to put it in the web tour, so we'll be able to see it. You can either click on the link or watch it right in Blackboard. So when you're finished viewing, can you please indicate with a green check mark?
To me, formative assessment describes all those processes by which teachers and learners use information about student achievement to make adjustments to the student's learning that improve their achievement. So it's about using information to adapt your teaching, adapt the work of the students, to put the learning back on track, to make sure that the learning is proceeding in the right direction, and to support that learning. So it's what happens when you don't just lecture students and rattle through the material and get to the end and ask them if they've understood it okay. It's constantly making those adjustments. One of the ways I like to talk about it is just imagine what would happen if a pilot flew like many teachers assess. So I flew back from Seattle a few weeks ago. Just imagine what the pilot would have done. He would have flown east for 9 hours, and then after 9 hours he'd say it's time to land. So he'll put the plane down and he'll ask, is this London? And of course, even if it's not London, he says, well, everybody's got to get off because I've got to get on to the next journey. And that's exactly the way that we've assessed in the past. We teach students material, and at the end of that teaching, we find out if they've learned it or not. And if they haven't, we say, too bad, because we're on to the next unit. So what formative assessment does is encourages teachers to take constant readings about where students are, just in the same way that a pilot takes constant readings about their position. And if
So I think most people are finished. So Marci, are you ready to move on?
We sure are. We weren't sure if we should wait a little bit more, but that's great. We'll keep going. So on this slide, you're also seeing the second dot point that says using Prism. So that's another activity that we'd like to have a look at. So Mally's going to post a link to a Prism article, and I'm going to explain a little bit about how this works. So we're also going to post a PDF copy, so you can click on either option. You don't have to do both. And what this is it's going to be a reading that Dylan Williams explains some of his strategies for assessment. And with the Prism, you have to log in using either Google or create an account. But the nice part about it is when you do log in, the reading becomes interactive, and we can build some knowledge together. So you'll see the three dots there, the blue, the red, and the green. As you're reading, you can highlight the text using the blue highlighter for things you already do, the red highlighter for things that interest or surprise you, and the green highlighter for the areas where you feel that you might be able to grow a little bit. And when we do this, then the letters will get bigger for the words that are selected the most, and then we can have a conversation about where we are with our thinking. So that's the PDF copy, and the Prism is there too. Perfect. Thanks, Mally.
And how many minutes did you want to do this for, Marci? Because I'll put the timer on.
About 5 minutes would be great, I think, to read through that and highlight if you choose to, or read the PDF. We sure can, Syria. Or sorry, Mally. Basically what we're doing is we posted 2 links, one to a PDF reading and one to the same reading but inside of a program called Prism. And what it allows you to do is while you're reading, it allows you to highlight the text, which gives us some feedback on how you're going with the document and what you're thinking about as while you're reading. It's a really great strategy that you can use in the classroom when you're doing a reading with students to check in with them and see how they're going along the way.
Okay, Marci, there's a couple questions in the chat. Oh, you saw them. Thank you. Debbie, people are doing the activity right now, so yes, the slide does have the video on it, but we're not playing the video right now.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so we are back. And basically now I can see where people have highlighted some of the information that we had a look at in the PDF. So I'm just scrolling through it now, and if you had a chance, I can see that 7 people contributed to the visualization. So that means 7 people highlighted the document, and then some of you may have read the PDF. So things that we already know. We have quite a few people that have written that they know about formative assessment. They've highlighted that word, blue, and there's they have highlighted that Teaching should be constantly responsive is blue, so that also shows that that's something that we've heard before. Now, I'm just taking a look down here. Things were my areas of growth. One of the ones that I really think is really interesting is activating students as instructional resources for each other. And Michelle and I are going to give you some strategies for that tonight. Another one that I think is interesting that is also highlighted green that talks about wiggle room is, it says, wouldn't allow teachers to negotiate on whether they're going to work on assessment for learning. And I think that that's interesting that that was highlighted green as well, because it shows that it's something that we need to be doing, especially with growing success. We definitely need to be doing that constant assessment. And the other one that I wanted to point out is about grades, telling students that they got 15 out of 20. And Michelle and I often talk a lot about the grading. And Michelle, do you want to just add anything about that right now, or shall we talk about that later?
Oh no, I can add. There's a lot of really interesting information now about the impact of grades. So some of the latest work that Dylan Williams been looking at is that they did some experimental studies with students about the impact of just being given grades, the impact of being given a grade with a comment, you know, a effective feedback comment, and the impact size of comment-only feedback. And what they found was that the level of engagement and responsiveness and well-being, almost in a way, for the students was exactly the same when they just gave them a test score and when they gave them a test score with the comment. And so what the research is really showing is that it is those comments that help feed learning forward. And when we use grading, it's significantly detrimental to students and how they view themselves as learners. So it's about picking, on those occasions, Williams looking at when you have to grade, that the feedback's given first, that the opportunity for students to improve based on the feedback is afforded, and then the grade is given at the end when there's nothing left to do in those situations when grades must be assigned.
Awesome. Thanks, Michelle. The last one I just want to point out, too, is in the fourth strategy, it's highlighted red. The teacher goes through an explanation of the topic, and if a student doesn't understand what's going on, they just flip the disc over to red. So that's an interesting, that was colored red, and that means that it was interesting or it surprised the reader. So Michelle, did you want to make a comment on that?
We might comment on it later because there's an example that we have for you from one of the classrooms that I've been working with where the teacher used that idea of the red and green cards but in a slightly different way. And we'll talk about that later, about how you can really use that strategy and leverage a huge amount of information out of some very simple red and green cards.
Thanks, Shell. All right, so I really hope that you had a chance to engage with that PRISM tool. And if you didn't, have a look at it when you have a second in the future, because it's one of those strategies where it's using a digital tool to really engage the kids in a reading so that, you know, when they have a task, they're more focused on what they're doing, and then we can also, we can get some feedback about what they thought about the reading, and then we can use that to decide how to move forward. Okay, I'm just going to go to the next slide here. Okay.
So we know from the work of Dylan Williams and also other work from people like John Hadding and other researchers about how significant it is as a teacher to know what's happening for your students. And that feedback is, as Dylan Williams says, it's the bridge between learning and teaching. That it's through that feedback, in whichever way we gather it, and the range of assessment tools that we use, that we're able to really figure out how our teaching is going in supporting the learning of our students. But to know that, we have to be informed. And that's really the role of formative assessment, is to gather that ongoing data about how the learning is happening for the people that we're hoping it's happening for. So we know that assessment matters for learning, and we just wanted to talk for a moment about the impact of learning and of school. This is really, I think, my favourite quote that explains what I really believe in about education, that the more that our students are able to know and the confidence that they develop at school, it opens opportunities for them. And that's, for me, why I do what I do. But we're now also privy to a range of huge amounts of research actually about the impact of learning for students. And we know that the longer that students are in school and the more that they choose to participate in education once they leave compulsory schooling, is the impact that it has on their health and their well-being. So the research is clear that the longer you're in school, the greater chances that you have of being healthy, happy, and positively contributing to society. So learning matters because it opens doorways, but it also matters because it impacts people's health and well-being in their future. And interestingly, in the last year or so, there's some data from longitudinal studies that have come out that have started to really question whether it's achievement at school that matters, or whether it's actually how happy you feel while you're at school. And interestingly, it's the latter. So it's that one about what sort of sense of belonging do our students have when they're at school whilst we're supporting them in their learning. And it's the belonging, it's that sense of being valued, of feeling that you have something to offer that significantly increases their chances of having a happier life. And so that's why we wanted to talk about how you can take some of those assessment strategies from Dylan William and start using them to think about, well, exactly how engaged are the students in learning, and how can I get some more information quickly to be responsive to that.
That's great. Okay, so we're going to move to the next slide. And on this slide, you're going to see 4 pictures. And what we wanted to do is just get you to use your stamping tool to put a happy face or a star, check mark or something on one of the pictures where you think that engagement is happening in that classroom. And if anybody wants to, please feel free to share in the chat why you chose the picture that you chose. Interesting. Yeah, I like that idea, Mike, that that when you're looking at the picture, you can see that the kids are doing something for the school, so they have a real purpose there.
I like how the idea of collaboration has come up as well.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And I find it interesting, too, that only a few people have chosen the picture with C, when that's the one that has the technology that's really visual there to see. That's great. Yeah, definitely collaboration and communication. It's actually hard to see from the outside, especially in the kindergarten room, for sure. Okay. So that's great. I'm just going to move to the next slide now. So thank you for your feedback there and for participating in that activity. So what is engagement? I'm just going to read from the Creating Thinking Classrooms book that was put out by the Critical Thinking Consortium. And they say that Students are engaged in their learning when they personally commit to freely dedicating effort towards the pursuit of educational goals and the performance of ongoing tasks. So we know that to define engagement, we really need to define it according to the research. Okay. So
we also know that it's important, I think, to acknowledge that learning is difficult, which is why we have this poster here. Not only does life begin at the edge of your comfort zone, but so too does new learning. And in fact, we know from the research that having an intellectual challenge, having a high cognitive challenge, we would call it, is a significant part of research. In fact, it's required for us to be able to use the word engagement. And so we're going to have a little bit of a talk at the moment and go through different levels about how we talk about engagement from the research. And that is that we know that actually we need three different things when we're talking about engagement. And the first one is that idea of having a cognitive challenge. So in the research, we know from Vygotsky, he talks about the zone of proximal development. There's a researcher in Australia who talks about the zone of confusion, about actively talking with our students about entering the zone of confusion is a really significant part of learning. There's another lady who works with math solutions, and she talks about the idea of constructive struggle.
okay, so Mally, we're going to have you post the Math Solutions link in the chat. And because of the way this one is formatted, you actually have to click on the link, and I think you might be able to show this one within the web, the Blackboard chat as well. Is that you have to scroll down on the page to find the video.
Want to turn your mic off, please?
I'll turn the mic.
Okay, it looks like there's a great discussion going on in the chat box as well. So Marci, are you ready to go on?
We sure are. I just posted a link to a Padlet. If you want to take a second and click on that, what we're going to do is just look at a couple of questions that are posted there. So what you can do is double click on the Padlet, and this will work on your computer screen or on an iPad, and then you can add your thinking about what strategies could be useful in supporting students into constructive struggle or the zone of confusion. And then on the other side, what do you need to find out to make the zone of confusion possible? So this is another strategy you can use to engage your students in discussion and sharing their thinking. And you can have them include their name, or they don't need to include their name, and then that way you can have them be honest and they don't have to worry about what their thinking might look like to their social peers. And great, so we have some strategies popping up there on the screen. I think that that open-ended questions is a really great strategy for constructive struggle. Michelle, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, one of the things that we've found is that that idea that Greg picked up on it, that often the rich open tasks create a buy-in for students, and how significant it is to try to find the right sort of task that creates a sort of an entryway, that there's enough in there that the students can enter into the task, but that we then leverage their involvement in it to address specific areas of the curriculum that otherwise we can't sort of create that buy-in for. And rich tasks offer us an incredible experience to do that. But of course it requires us to know things about the students, to know exactly what that little bit of entry knowledge is to be able to access it, and also to know what it is that's going to get them to buy in, as Greg said.
Thanks, Sean. I also think, looking at the other side, the question about what do you need to find out to make the zone of confusion possible, I really like the comment where it says a safe environment is also needed for students to feel comfortable with taking risks, and that's really essential. They need to feel like they can make a mistake and that it's okay to do that, and see it as a learning opportunity.
And that really picks up on some of the chat where people talked about the idea of yet, and Carol Dweck and growth mindset, and how significant that is, that when we're starting to challenge and recognize how significant struggle is, constructive struggle is for learning, that we need to be supporting the students at the same time in terms of the emotional impact of that. And you're right, Greg, we do need more professional development in question design, because it's the questioning that leads to those sorts of powerful experiences with the students.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to bring everybody back to the slide deck, and the image that you see right now is the high cognitive challenge. And then as we come back, I'm going to move us to the next slide, and Michelle's going to talk to us a little bit about this picture.
Yeah, so one of the things that I found with my students was when we started talking about trying to talk to them about how cognitively challenged that they were, that it was such a sort of internal concept that they found it difficult to talk about. And so because we use word climbs a lot to discuss different levels of language, one day we just decided to start doing we decided to create a brain climb about how sweaty your brain was. So we always kind of talked about this idea that we wanted our brains to feel like they were out for a run or they were out being active. But we also then realized that you also sweat sometimes from anxiety. And so we wanted them to be able to talk about and articulate the right kind of having a sweaty brain. And so together with the students, we designed the sweaty brain climb. And so now when we talk about entering the zone of confusion or constructive struggle with them, when we say, listen, today I'm really hoping that you enter the zone of confusion, we can say, I'm hoping that at some point your brain feels like it's active or endeavoring or exerting, and can you flip your red or green tags over if you're either at stressed or restoring, because that's not the level of cognitive challenge or cognitive downtime that we're hoping for today. And so we started using the traffic lights in Dylan William as a system for the students to give feedback about the level of challenge that they felt in their own brain. And it's a really effective, Dylan William talks about one of the core strategies of embedded formative assessment being that the students are activators of their own learning. And so this technique of just asking the students, show me with your fingers, what level are you at, 1 for restoring, 2 for contemplating, and flashing hand signal for stress, as well as the traffic lights, is a really neat way of gathering some really quick assessment data from the students so that we can make sure that we end up in London rather than somewhere near Amsterdam at the end of the lesson.
Fantastic. Mally also posted a link to the graphic that you're seeing on the screen there, and if you click on it, it will allow you to download a copy if that's something that you wanted to have. Okay. So, high cognitive challenge. Dylan Williams talks about how significant the questions that we ask are in eliciting evidence. So we need to become more informed about the level of the cognitive challenge. So that's why we ask these questions. And the sweaty brain climb is one option that you guys can use. But there's also some questions that come from the real framework. And you see a few examples on your screen there. And we also have a link, if you want to post that as well, Mally, that takes you to that information for more questions. And that also comes from Dylan Williams' book, Embedded Formative Assessment, so we have a link to that as well. And those are both resources that you can use to learn more about questions that you can ask. So, did you want to add anything to that, Michelle?
No, I think what we'll do now is show you a little quick exiting strategy that from a teacher at a school that we were working with, where they used the traffic lights for the kids to exit the classroom. And instead of asking, how did you go with your learning today, the question we asked was, how did I as a teacher go in supporting you with your learning? Did I get the level of challenge right? Because we know that cognitive challenge is a big part of substantive engagement.
Fantastic. So, Mally, we just need you to put the link to the YouTube video in the chat there for folks to watch. It's very short.
So if you can put a green check in, use this green check mark if you would let us know when you're done.
Great, thanks, Mally.
So these are some just really practical strategies that you can use tomorrow to start asking the students about the level of pitch in terms of the intellectual challenge that we're offering them. Because we know that they need to have cognitive challenge in order for new learning to occur. But the challenge for us is that that requires that open and honest conversation between the students and ourselves about how they're going, and that emotional support for them at the same time when you start really pushing their learning.
Before we move on to the next slide, we'd like you to just take a moment to think back to that double entry journal and just think about, is there anything that you could maybe add to it at this point? Is there a strategy that you've seen, or some thinking or a question that you might want to add to it?
Or a deeper understanding of something now?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It might just take 60 seconds.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to move to the next slide and talk a little bit about the next part of sustainable engagement.
So we know from research that we need their brains to be sweating. To get new learning and to get substantive engagement, there has to be the right level of cognitive challenge for them. But at the same time that that's happening, we also need to be having a high affective response. So the affective is really just the emotional reaction to the kids' learning. And I really have always really thought about it in terms of this quote, and that is that educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all. So we wanted to talk about a few different ways that you can create or elicit that sort of emotional reaction to learning. And one of them that we found is that idea of drawing upon the interest of students or inspiring them into yours. So in one classroom that I worked in, one of the things that we did was we asked the kindergarten students what exactly was it that they wanted to learn about. And then we did some data collection around that idea. And in the end, they came up with monkeys. And so what we did was figure out how to leverage the idea that they were interested in monkeys and use it against them, really. And in the end, we came up with an idea that we would get them to innovate upon a text and design their English literacy program as well as part of their science and part of their geography curriculum around this idea that they were interested in monkeys and how could we use that to really push their learning. And I just want to show you a little video now that is a result of what they did. And just also let you know that the kids just sat down and we had the camera. And these students were both new arrival refugee students to Australia who spoke very little English at the beginning of the year.
And for some reason, the link isn't going. Oh, I see why. In the video, so if you can click on the link that's in the chat, that would be great. I'll just go back to the whiteboard.
So we really hope that that is just an example of how powerful it can be to figure out from the students what it is that they're interested in learning and then connect that back to the curriculum that we're expected to teach. The other way really of creating a high affective response comes from a very different sort of perspective. And that is to actually figure out how to frustrate the kids enough to move. So frustration is actually a really powerful driver. And one of the things that, for example, I did last year with my students was I had a lot of difficulty trying to find the right sort of hook for them that would bring them into the idea of figuring out how to be more effective writers. And one day a student came to school and he was really annoyed because it had been raining and his feet were wet. And he was annoyed that there weren't enough drains in the street so that he could get into his car without his foot getting wet in the puddle, and that this happened every time that it rained. And so I said to him, well, what are we going to do about that? And he thought this was a very strange response because he thought that what we were going to do was just sort of let it go. And he said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, we could write a letter to the council in complaint and give them some suggestions about how to improve the drainage in your street. Well, it snowballed to the point where almost all of my students were writing their own letters of complaint to the council or to their stratas from their homes where they live. And I managed to get them to write incredibly persuasive text because they were driven by this frustration of making something better. And that's often where those ideas around challenge-based learning come from.
Okay, so when we talk about these strategies, another place that we can get we can go and we can look back is back to the real framework. And we know that we need strategies for getting feedback from the students because really it's their learning, and we need to know what their level of effective response is. So you see some examples there. What parts of the learning did you find interesting today and why? And this is just this idea of talking to your students, building those relationships with them, and finding out what they're interested in.
And it's also, sorry, Ma.
No, go ahead, Shaw.
It's also really important to note here that it's this high affective response that often leads to why projects like STEAM or STEM, coding, makerspaces, etc., why they work. They work because they create really high affective responses in a lot of our learners. But what we need to know is that what else is missing. So we know that often through STEAM and STEM, they have a high affective response. But how do we pitch the challenge or question in the right way to drive the cognitive challenge high? And there's one other thing that's missing in the part of engagement that we need to consider, and that is the third piece of the puzzle. And we'll get to that in just a second. What we want you to do is go back very quickly and add any other strategies into your double entry journal, any things that you've picked up on, and record your own learning there. Just go for it.
Awesome.
Leave it?
Yep.
All right. So the last part that we need to talk about when we talk about engagement is actually this idea that Greg sort of picked up on before, and that was this idea of a buy-in. So in the research around what engagement actually means, this idea of having three factors or three elements combining together at the same time is common in all of the research about what engagement actually is. What's different is sometimes the labels that they use. So for us, we've gone from some research from the Fair Go project, which is the project that I've been involved in with the university here, which is why we chose these labels. But the high operative response, the last piece that we're going to talk about, is often in research referred to as behavioural. And what it is really is a very subtle difference between in task and on task. So we would define on task as the students doing what you've asked them to do because you've asked them to do that. So in the research, they actually call that procedural engagement. But the kids are doing school, they're going along with what you've asked them to do because you've asked them to do that. However, what we want is in task. And in task is when the kids are involved in their learning. They're in it because they see that that learning is relevant to them, it's useful to them, and in some cases they really enjoy it. And this is where we think about Simon Sinek, where he talks about working hard for something we don't care about is called stress. Working hard for something we love is called passion. And it's about really trying to find the things that the kids are interested in or that they really value and leveraging the curriculum from that to get the in task rather than the on task. This sort of aspect of engagement has a really strong connection to Dylan Williams' idea of embedded formative assessment of sharing the learning goals and the success criteria with the students. So we're going to show you another slide now. And on here, you'll see the sort of common acronyms that you see when you Google learning goals of WALT, WILF, and TIB is a new one, relatively new one sometimes. And the reason that we use those is, as you guys know, in Ontario, it's a big driver through the school board over there, is that how significant it is for the students to know what they're learning to do and how to be successful at that. But the TIB, that this is because, or sometimes we have TMB, this matters because, is a really big part of trying to create an operative response in our learners about them knowing what they're learning about, how to be successful, and why that learning is relevant to them. The thing I really like about the photo that you can see there on the right is how through conversation with the team of teachers, we decided that actually thinking about what I'm looking for wasn't the right sort of message to be sending. What we wanted to have is what we're looking for. What are we as a collective group of learners looking for to be successful at this? And it started to shift towards that idea of the students then activating as learning resources for one another. There is, however, a word of caution from Dylan Williams about learning intentions. I'm going to watch that now.
Thanks, Molly.
So we really liked that video in that it, talks about the danger of just taking an idea and doing it without really critically thinking about how best to use it and in what situation. So when we knew that learning intentions were a really important part of the pedagogies that we chose in the classroom, it's about knowing when they're useful, when they're not useful, and it's the same for all of these strategies. And as Dylan Williams says, it's really about thinking, how do I put the learner at the heart of this process and learning at the heart of this process? So we just wanted to show you a few other questions that you can use from the REAL framework around eliciting evidence from the kids about their operative response. That actually Mike talked about earlier in the chat about it being active engagement. And that's really that sort of operative response there. So list 3 ways the skills that you've learnt can be used elsewhere, and why is what we did today important for you as a person. So in bringing this all together, it's really in the middle there, where in that Venn diagram where all 3 of those areas connect, the cognitive, the affective, and the operative, that is when we get substantive engagement. And the thing with that is that as an educator, it's really difficult because it's personal and it's individual, and it may not happen for some kids. In fact, it's very rare that you get substantive engagement for every student, every lesson, And it's important that we have some tools about how we figure out how engaged the students are so that we can respond and make the learning about them. Marci talked about a book before written by Garfield G. Newman, and he talks about in creating thinking classrooms that when you get the students interested, valued and challenged, you then get to transformed. So he terms it educational engagement. We call it substantive engagement. In a way, we just sort of think that we should all just refer to it as engagement. And when we mean procedural engagement, we just mean participate rather than using the word engage. And this is why, back at the beginning, and some of you guys picked up on that why some of those images that we had actually can never truly demonstrate engagement, because you needed to know what's happening within the minds of those children, and so we need to ask questions. And that's why we wanted to show you some questions that you can ask to start eliciting that information. And what we really need with kids is meaningful conversation with, between and about our students, and we need to respond to that. So another way of collecting some data is actually through really carefully constructed Google Forms. So this is a Google form that I've used with my students, and we have the QR code up in the classroom, and from an iPad or a device, I just ask them every now and again if they can reflect and give me some feedback about how things were going. If I hadn't asked for some data as we were going along within the learning area. And the other one, you can see the student on the right, was we made a big poster of the Venn diagram and told the students about what it means to be engaged, and asked them as an exit ticket to move their photo into different areas of the Venn diagram as they left the classroom to go get their lunch, to share back with us how they were going with their learning. And I just want you to think back to those kindergarten students when you start thinking, oh my gosh, my students can't do that. They can do that. Those kids, they're capable young people that we work with. And when we can have new arrival students unpromptedly talking about becoming authors, and the young boy in year 1 talking about how they use the traffic light system, the brains of these children are incredibly capable, and it's about leveraging that. So we thought what we might do now is just give you a brief moment to update, the final update of your double entry journal. So to go back, note any other strategies that you've picked up on, or questions that you have, or a deeper understanding that you have. We'll give you about a minute to do that before we start to wrap up the session. Ready?
Yep.
So we thought that there's really just one sort of last main point to make, and that is that all of this, the assessment strategies and the importance of engagement, they all hinge upon the fact that learning is about human beings, and humans are about relationships. And so we thought we'd show you this lovely quote from Rita Pearson, and really just talk about that. The beautiful thing of not only being cognizant of engagement, but actively trying to create it, measure it, respond when we don't have it, is that all of this creates connection. And it creates, as they say in the research, learning experiences and environments that help people see that they belong here at this school. They have knowledge, they're capable, and that they're valued. And we know from the research now that message about students having a sense of belonging at schools, that is a better predictor of how they live their life, the happiness that they have in their life, and what they achieve in their life. And so whilst their level of achievement matters, so too does how they feel at school. We need to be paying attention to this. We need to get them on the edge of their comfort zones. We need to get their brains sweating. We need to figure out how to create affective responses and hook them in. And we need to make sure that they're in task, not on task. That is a really hard part of our job, but it's worth paying attention to. In fact, it's important. In fact, it's imperative.
So true. Okay, so what we'd like to do now is just ask if you have any questions. If anybody wants to ask a question using their microphone, or type it in the chat, and we can just have a little bit of a discussion for the last few minutes of the webinar tonight.
Yeah. No? Does anyone have any feedback for us then? It's actually a really weird way to present. We can't see or read anyone's faces or expressions. So anything that you'd like to add about anything that you picked up on tonight, or take a photo of your double entry journal and share it via Twitter, we could love to have a look at that.
Oh, sorry, Mally's going to answer that. That's great. We're going to send out the list of resources. Perfect. I have a question. Did listening and hearing about that Venn diagram and the way that engagement, substantive engagement, those three pieces, was that something new for anybody? Had you thought about that before, or how those three pieces have to come together for it to be true engagement? Because I know that before I started researching this and having these conversations with Michelle, that a lot of the time I use the word engagement and probably not in the correct way as defined by research. I was using it probably to describe that idea of compliance. So this really changed how I interact with my students in the classroom, and involving them in that discussion, I think, really changed how deep their learning was able to go. That's great, Becky.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, Becky, for me, is that because it's so personal and it's so sort of embedded within the students, to really know if they're engaged, I had to bring them in on conversations about that. I had to let them know what it meant and what it looks like or felt like, and I had to sort of create the relationship too with me where they were honest, because initially they would just tell me what they thought I wanted to hear, mostly because they liked me. And so I had to figure out ways to really get them to buy into this idea that the more honest they were in their feedback with me, the more that I could respond and change what I did to support their learning better. And that whatever feedback they gave me was actually about me supporting them, not about them needing to feel bad about their capabilities, if that's sort of what the block was. How long does it take to buy in? It depends on what the hook is. So for some things, it's hard to find the right sort of way to leverage and bring the kids into particular things. But others, it's fast. And I think I have learned how to be better at paying attention to things that they talk about, you know, at lunchtime and at recess, or the things that they're annoyed by, or the things that they're really interested in. And I pay really close attention to what they talk about when it's downtime, and I start trying to figure out how I can bring that in, and then how I can connect it to the syllabus. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I like. Thanks. That's a really nice sort of thing to say, that we've honoured them as instructional resources. I always think that learning, you know, that teaching and schools, we're in the business of learning, you know. And so because we're in the business of learning, the teaching is the thing that we do to help get them there. But if I'm not brave enough or vulnerable enough sometimes to ask for really strong feedback about my teaching, I can't be in the business of learning because I don't know how the learning's going. And I think I've always just really wanted my students to walk away from my school or my classroom or the teachers that I work with, that their students walk away having this sort of narrative in their head that once at school at least they had an experience where someone really valued what they thought and how they felt and really believed that they were capable. And I kind of think that it's like an insurance scheme for them, you know, that one day in case they ever need it, if they get really stuck in life, they can think back to that moment and go, I am capable, I can figure my way out of this, people do believe in me. And I always sort of have that in the back of my mind because I know in my life there's times when I've had to draw upon that. Wondering how you accurately assess so many students in such a short time as a teacher and teaching like that. How do I assess so many kids in a short time? I use different techniques. So sometimes, you know, I use the Dylan Williams fingers, hands up technique and I ask a really quick question. And I sort of balance the ones that take a bit longer with the ones that take a little bit of less time. And I've gotten better with myself at being disciplined in setting a timer. So in Australia now, in Sydney, at least in New South Wales, reflection is one-fifth of our English syllabus. And so I make sure that I set a timer to make sure that we're setting time for reflection. And it took a bit of time because you feel like this pressure to push through with content and get the kids have to finish this and they have to wrap it up. And so now we set a timer, and when the timer goes off, we know that we have 5 minutes until the next timer goes off, and that's our warning period. And when the second timer goes off, that's it, we stop and we reflect. But I showed the students the research about the power of reflection and why reflection matters. And so we stick to that as much as possible. So we make it a priority because it matters.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
Okay, so maybe just to wrap up, because I think we need to be cognizant of people's time, and I'm going to put Marci and Michelle's emails in the chat, and hopefully you'll be able to get in touch with them if you need, and I have their permission to do so. So there they are, and they will also be listed on the resource page as well as their Twitter handle, so you'll be able to keep in touch with them and ask them any questions or follow the work that they're doing in their classes. So that's just great. Thanks, Michelle and Marci. I think you said at the very beginning that you wanted people to be able to just take one strategy away with them to their classrooms tomorrow, and I know that if I were still in the class, I'd be able to take at least one or two quick strategies into the class that would really be engaging for the kids. So we really appreciate all your ideas and some of the tools even that you showed and demonstrated. So that was wonderful. Thank you so much. Before we finish, I'm just going to go ahead. So there are a couple of things. One of them is the survey that Syria mentioned. If we'd really appreciate it if you would fill it out for a couple of reasons. One of them is that you will be able to, once you fill in the survey, you'll be sent a certificate that you can use for a participation that you can use for your professional portfolio. And the other one is that the Ministry of Education has provided funding for OTF Connects, and they would also like to have feedback about the impact of the program. So it's really important to OTF for the survey to be completed, if you could do that. It really only takes just a couple of seconds. And then finally, there are some many sessions still that you could still register for, and this is just some information about the ones that are upcoming till almost the end of February. so we'd love the opportunity for you to participate in another OTF session. And we thank you very much. So I'm just going to stop the recording now. So Marci and Michelle, if you just want to hang on for just a couple of minutes.